and I head on her neck with a knife that let her don't shout. She shout now, I will stab it on her stomach. So the girl was like shaking. And I volume the television of the volume the voice of the television. It was on that now. I had to tie her hands with the neck so that on the strangling her, she will not have the strength to drag with me.
At a small hotel in Port Harcourt, the morning started like any other. The housekeeper began her shift expecting it to be just another routine day. Quiet halls, work that followed the same pattern every day. Door after door, she cleaned rooms. Some just vacated while others still occupied. But on this particular morning, nothing could have prepared her for what was waiting behind one of those doors. Because inside that room was not a vacated guest. Inside that room was a young woman's lifeless body, bound and left like she meant nothing. She was not the first, and she would not be the last. To understand what happened in those hotel rooms across Nigeria in 2019, we have to go back to a small fishing community called the Guma in Rivers State, where gracious David West was born. Around 1980, he was the only child of his mother, raised inside a polygamous household. He and his mother lived separately from his father's other wives and children, on the outside of a family he technically belonged to. That kind of loneliness at that age leaves marks. He later told investigators that his mother was poisoned and died. Whether that is true or not, it is what he believed. And for a young boy already living on the edges of his own family, losing the one person who was entirely his, in that way would have shattered something. With no strong foundation at home, David West drifted toward the streets. And the streets of Buguma in the early 2000s were dangerous. The Niger Delta militancy was at its peak. Armed groups, cult gangs, and violence were woven into everyday life. David West found his people in the Greenlanders, also known as Dabum, a ruthless street gang that emerged out of that militant culture. But then a turning point, or what looked like one. A church took him in, worked, supported, and eventually helped him secure a job at a university in a very emo state. People who knew him said he seemed to be rebuilding. But by 2019, David West was homeless and unemployed, moving from city to city with something dark growing inside him that he himself could not explain. It started in Lagos sometime in June 2019. Gracious David West checked into a budget hotel in the Ikeja area with a young woman. By morning, he had checked out alone. The woman was found in the room, strangled, bound with strips of white cloth cut from the bedsheet and her debit card missing. He moved to Owerri next, then Abia, then Edo. City after city, the same pattern repeated. A woman, a hotel, a night that seemed normal, and then silence. By the time he arrived in Port Harcourt, Rivers State, in July 2019, he had already done this at least 6 times. He was not learning. He was not escalating. He had already arrived at his method. Calm, calculated, rehearsed. Port Harcourt is where the world finally noticed. Because in Port Harcourt, he did not stop. His routine in the city never changed. Every evening he would get into his car and cruise the streets, looking for women near hotels, nightlife spots, or roadsides. He presented himself as a military officer. Well-spoken, confident. He promised money, a good meal, a safe night. Women believed him. Once inside the hotel room, always a budget hotel, always chosen for its poor security and lack of CCTV cameras, the act would begin normally. They would eat together, watch television, and then sleep. But David West never slept. He waited. When he was certain the woman beside him was deep enough in sleep, he would get up, quietly retrieve the kitchen knife he always carried, turn the television volume all the way up, then begin cutting the bedsheet and pillowcases into long strips. By August 2019, Port Harcourt knew something was deeply wrong. The Rivers State Commissioner of Police stood before journalists and made it official. 8 women, he said. 8 women killed inside hotel rooms across Port Harcourt in just 2 months. Same method every time. Same white cloth. Same pattern. The city stopped. For the women of Port Harcourt, the fear was immediate and personal. Women who had previously walked home alone at night stopped doing so. Phone calls between friends became check-ins. I got home safely. Text messages sent at midnight just to confirm someone was still breathing. The city had changed, and every woman in it felt it. And then the women of Port Harcourt did what Nigerian women have always done when the system fails them. They took to the streets. Over 75 women's groups marched through the city. The Federation of Women Lawyers, the National Association of Women Journalists, Rotary Club members, activists, mothers, daughters, all of them united behind banners that read, "Stop the killings. Protect the woman's life. Respect women. Don't kill them." It was one of the largest public demonstrations the city had seen in years, and it was entirely driven by grief and fury. The backlash extended all the way to Government House. Women's groups confronted state officials directly, demanding answers. But perhaps the moment that inflamed public anger most was not the killings themselves. It was a statement made by the Commissioner of Police in response to them. He advised women, publicly, to avoid prostitution as a way to stay safe. The outrage was immediate, because one victim named Jennifer had not been a sex worker. She had come from Lagos to celebrate her birthday, and another, Maureen, had simply been in the wrong place. These were not women who had made dangerous choices. These were women who had been hunted by a man who made a dangerous choice. The state government was forced to issue a public apology to the women of Rivers State. But apologies do not bring anyone home. The protests, apologies, emergency meetings, and fear, all of it happening while gracious David West was still out there, still driving those same streets, still looking. The police were under enormous pressure, and they had very little to go on, because this man had been extraordinarily careful picking out hotels with no CCTV cameras. The police were under enormous pressure. Weeks of searching. No name, no face, no witnesses. Just bodies and white strips of cloth left behind in budget hotel rooms across the city. But on the night of September 18, 2019, David West made his first and only mistake. He checked into a hotel along Sars Road in Rue Pourquoi, a Port Harcourt suburb. A hotel he had not used before. A hotel he had not checked for cameras. When investigators pulled the footage the next morning, a face emerged from the recording for the first time, clear enough to identify and to broadcast. The image went out across Rivers State immediately. Every police unit, every checkpoint, every road out of Port Harcourt. On the morning of September 19, 2019, gracious David West was intercepted along the east-west road area. He was leaving the city and heading towards another state. This time there was nowhere to go. He was handcuffed and driven back to Port Harcourt. The city that had buried woman after woman for months finally had its man. On September 20, 2019, one day after his arrest, gracious David West was paraded before journalists in Port Harcourt. And what he said next stopped the entire country. He confessed freely, openly, in front of cameras. He said he had killed 15 women, starting in Lagos, then Owerri, then Port Harcourt. He described the knife, the bedsheets, the ATM cards, the television turned all the way up, calmly, without visible remorse, like a man recounting errands he had run. The trial began in October 2019. and it was as dramatic as everything that preceded it. David West initially pleaded guilty to 9 murder charges. Then in March 2020, he walked into court and denied everything. He claimed he did not recognize himself in the CCTV footage. He claimed he had never been to those hotels. He claimed he had committed no offense. Journalists who covered the trial described a man who was erratic, hot-tempered, and who constantly interrupted the judge. A man who had confessed everything on camera, now pretending to be a stranger to his own crimes. Justice Adolphus Annabelli was not moved. The court relied on David West's own voluntary confessions, witness testimony, and the CCTV footage from the hotel. The evidence was overwhelming. On October 9, 2020, Gracious David West was found guilty of murder and attempted murder. Justice Annabelli sentenced him to death by hanging.